The rain drummed against the rooftops, sending thin rivulets of water streaming down the cracked pavement. A lone figure darted between shadows, sleek and silent, her thin frame barely visible beneath the flickering glow of a distant street lamp. The officers had been chasing her for months, but no matter how many traps they set, how many nets they cast, she always slipped through their grasp. Some said she was just a stray, a half-starved mongrel scavenging for food. Others whispered she was something more, a ghostly guardian with eyes that gleamed like gold in the darkness. Sergeant Miller stood beneath the awning of a closed hardware store, his breath misting in the cold night air. He had seen plenty in his years on the force. Burglars, arsonists, runaways, but never a dog that had managed to evade capture for this long. There was a purpose in her movements, a determination that unsettled him. This wasn't random scavenging. She was guarding something. "We got another call," Officer Ramos said, stepping beside him and shaking water from his jacket. "Third sighting this week. Old lady over on Briar Lane. Swears she saw the dog dragging something in its mouth. Looked like a bundle." Miller's jaw tightened. A bundle? That's what she said. Could have been trash, could have been something else. She said it was wrapped up in cloth. The image sent a chill up Miller's spine. He had already ruled out the usual explanations, feral dog, misplaced pet, but the reports were becoming stranger. The dog never left the industrial side of town, circling the same abandoned buildings, slipping into the same alleys, vanishing to the same rusted fence behind the old textile mill. He exhaled sharply. "We're going back out." They moved quickly, their boots splashing through puddles as they made their way toward the district that had long since been given over to decay. The streetlights here flickered weakly, buzzing like dying insects. Broken windows gaped like empty eye sockets, and the remains of long-forgotten businesses stood in silent testimony to better days. Then, just as they turned onto Holloway Street, a blur of motion caught Miller's eye. There she was, thin but strong, her matted fur slick with rain. She bolted across the road, pausing only for a second, just long enough to meet his gaze. It was the same as always. Intelligence burned in those amber eyes. Something ancient and knowing, something that didn't belong to a mere street dog. Miller reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. "We've got her. Holloway and Fifth. Cut her off." The dog took off, her paws barely making a sound against the wet pavement. Ramos ran after her, but Miller knew how this would end. She was too fast, too clever. Even with 3 officers converging, she'd find a way out. And she did. By the time Miller reached the alley, she was gone. But this time, she had left something behind. Ramos knelt, frowning as he reached the bundle at his feet. "Sir, I think this is what the old lady saw." Miller crouched beside him, his fingers brushing damp fabric. It was small, barely the size of a loaf of bread, and wrapped tightly in a tattered piece of cloth. Slowly, he pulled it back. Inside was an old teddy bear, its fur worn, its seams frayed. Something about it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. She was carrying this? Ramos nodded. "Looks like it." Miller stared down at the stuffed bear, his mind racing. This wasn't just a stray's plaything. This was something else. A clue, a message, a memory. And for the first time, he felt a prickle of fear. The dog wasn't just running. She was protecting something. And whatever it was, it had been small enough to clutch in her jaws. He looked up at the darkened windows of the abandoned textile mill. The rain beat against the rusted doors, whispering secrets only the wind could hear. Something was inside that building, and the dog wasn't going to let anyone near it. The wind howled through the skeletal remains of the textile mill as Miller stepped through the rusted entrance, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The dog had led them here, and the abandoned building felt different now, charged with energy that set his nerves on edge. The air smelled of rust and damp wood, the floorboards groaning under his weight. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped steadily, the only sound besides his own breathing. Ramos followed close behind, his hand hovering over his holster. "You feel that?" he murmured. Miller nodded. There was something about this place, something that made the skin prickle at the nape of his neck. The dog had been circling this building for weeks, refusing to leave its perimeter. And now, standing inside, he understood why. A scuffling noise echoed from the shadows. Both officers froze. Miller's light swept across the far end of the warehouse, illuminating rows of rusted machinery and rotting wooden crates. Then the beam caught something, a flash of movement, the glint of eyes. She was there. The dog stood in the farthest corner, her body rigid, hackles raised. She growled low in her throat, not in warning, but in desperation. Behind her, something shifted. Miller took a cautious step forward, but she lunged, her teeth bared. He stopped. The dog had been elusive, but she had never been outright aggressive. Until now, whatever she was guarding, it was more important than her own fear of them. Ramos exhaled sharply. What the hell is back there? The dog barked once, sharp and clipped, her golden eyes locked onto Miller's. It was an unmistakable message. Stay back. Miller ignored it. He crouched low, keeping his movements slow, careful. His flashlight traced the edge of the crates, finally landing on the source of the movement. A bundle of rags. No, not rags. A bundle of cloth. A shape, small, and then it moved. His breath caught. It wasn't just a bundle. It was a baby. Miller's mind struggled to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. The tiny form stirred, barely perceptible in the dim light. Pale skin, fragile limbs, wrapped haphazardly in torn fabric. The child was silent, eerily so. Ramos swore under his breath. Jesus, is that... Miller moved before he could finish the sentence. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold fabric. The dog growled again, but this time her voice wavered. The sound was not a warning. It was a plea. "It's okay," Miller murmured, though he wasn't sure he was speaking to the dog, the child, or himself. The baby's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Too shallow. The air in the warehouse was frigid, and the child's skin was cold to the touch. "We need an ambulance," Miller said, his voice steadier than he felt. Ramos fumbled for his radio. "Dispatch! We need medical assistance at the old textile mill. Infant found, unresponsive but breathing." Miller barely heard the response. His focus remained on the dog, who had not moved from her position between them and the child. Her thin body trembled, but still she stood firm. Miller met her eyes again. "You kept her warm, didn't you?" The dog blinked slowly, her body sagging slightly, as if acknowledging the truth. He reached out, careful not to startle her, and placed a hand on her head. She flinched at first, but did not move away. Beneath his fingers, her fur was coarse and damp, her ribs sharp beneath her skin. How long had she been out here, guarding this fragile life? Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Ramos stood, glancing toward the entrance. "They're almost here." Miller lifted the baby gently, cradling her against his chest. The child stirred slightly, a weak sound escaping her lips. Relief flooded through him, but was quickly overshadowed by something else. Who had left her here? And why? Outside, red and blue lights cut through the darkness as paramedics rushed in. Miller handed the baby over, his fingers reluctant to let go. The dog whined, pacing anxiously as the medics worked. "She needs to come with us," Miller said, looking back at the dog. "She won't leave the kid." The paramedics hesitated, exchanging glances. One of them, a woman with tired eyes, gave a small nod. "Let her ride with us. She might be the reason this baby's still alive." The dog hesitated for only a moment before following them, her movements slow, exhausted. Miller climbed into the back of the ambulance beside her. As they pulled away from the mill, Miller looked down at the animal curled at his feet. He had spent months trying to catch this dog, convinced she was just another stray. But she hadn't been running aimlessly. She had been fighting to keep something alive. And now, Miller had a new mission. He was going to find out who had abandoned that baby, and why. The hospital lights cast a sterile glow over everything, making the world inside feel disconnected from the one outside. Miller stood near the glass partition, watching as doctors and nurses worked over the tiny form swaddled in fresh blankets. The baby's breathing was stronger now, her color no longer the sickly pale it had been when he'd found her in that abandoned mill. The sight should have given him relief, but all he felt was the weight of too many unanswered questions. At his feet, the dog, her new tag reading Hope, lay motionless, her head resting on her paws. She had refused to leave the baby's side since the moment they arrived, pacing and whining any time a nurse took the child away for examinations. Now, with the baby stable, Hope had finally collapsed into exhausted sleep, her thin body rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. A voice cut through his thoughts. Sergeant Miller. He turned to see a woman approaching, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. Detective Avery, a sharp-eyed investigator with a reputation for untangling the worst kinds of cases. She held a file in her hands, her expression unreadable. "We ran the baby's DNA," she said without preamble. "It's a match for Olivia Grant." Miller frowned. The name was familiar. Then it clicked. A missing persons case. "Olivia Grant," he echoed. "The woman who vanished 6 months ago?" Avery nodded. "Reported missing after leaving work late one night. Her car was found abandoned outside the city limits. No signs of a struggle, no witnesses, no leads. She was presumed dead." She hesitated, then flipped open the file. "But now we know she wasn't." Miller's stomach turned. "She was pregnant when she disappeared." Avery exhaled slowly. "And someone left that baby to die." The words hung heavy in the air. Miller's mind churned, piecing together a fragment of a story that felt bigger, darker than he had first imagined. A woman abducted, a child hidden away, and a dog, the only thing standing between that baby and certain death. "Have you found Olivia?" he asked. Avery's expression darkened. "Not yet." Miller looked back through a glass at the tiny infant, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos that had brought her here. "She survived because of that dog," he said, his voice quiet. Avery followed his gaze. "Yeah, I'd say that dog's worth listening to." The words settled deep in Miller's chest. Hope had been circling that warehouse for weeks, refusing to leave even when food, safety, and shelter were within her reach. She hadn't just found that baby by chance. She had been waiting, watching, protecting. She knew something, and if she had been waiting, then maybe, just maybe, Olivia was still out there too. The next morning, Miller returned to the warehouse. The air was still thick with the scent of rust and decay, the remnants of crime scene tape fluttering near the entrance. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to find, but his gut told him there was something they had missed. Hope trotted beside him, her nose twitching, ears perked. She was alert now, no longer the exhausted creature from the night before. She moved with purpose, weaving between broken crates, sniffing along the ground. Then she stopped. A low whimper escaped her throat as she pressed her nose against a pile of debris near the far wall. Miller knelt, brushing aside the dirt and scattered wood. And then he saw it. A half-buried bracelet, tarnished and dull, but still intact. When he lifted it, his pulse quickened. A name was engraved along the inner band. Olivia Grant. Miller stared at the bracelet, his grip tightening. Hope pawed at the ground beside him, whining softly, and in that moment he knew Olivia had been here, and someone had wanted to erase all traces of her. By the time he got back to the station, the pieces were beginning to fit together. The mill wasn't just a random hiding place. It was a drop site. Someone had abandoned that baby there, assuming no one would find her. But Hope had, and if the dog had stayed behind for the child, then where had Olivia gone? Miller dug through old reports, combing through every lead that had gone cold. A witness had once reported seeing a black van near Olivia's abandoned car, but the tip had led nowhere. He pulled up traffic camera footage from that night, this time with fresh eyes. And there it was, a black van, its license plate just barely visible under the dim streetlights. He ran the plates. The results hit like a punch to the gut. The van was registered to a known associate of a human trafficking ring that had been operating under their noses for years. Olivia hadn't just disappeared. She had been taken. Miller grabbed his jacket, his heart pounding. "Avery!" he called out. "We just found our first real lead." The raid happened fast. The location, an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town, had been flagged in old case files but never investigated thoroughly. This time they had cause. This time they had proof. Miller and Avery led the charge, their team moving in with practiced precision. Doors were kicked in, rooms cleared. The place was nearly empty. Nearly. In one of the back rooms, chained to a rusted bed frame, was Olivia Grant. She was barely conscious, her body frail, her skin bruised, but she was alive. When Miller knelt beside her, she flinched at first, her eyes wide with fear. Then recognition flickered through them. "The baby," she rasped. "She's safe," Miller assured her. "She's going to be okay." A sob broke from Olivia's lips, her body trembling. Tears streaked down her dirt-streaked face as she collapsed against him, too weak to hold herself up any longer. Behind them, officers moved swiftly, arresting the few remaining men still in the building. The operation wasn't over. The people behind us ran deeper than just one location, but they had cracked something open, and more importantly, Olivia was going home. Days later, Miller stood outside the hospital once more. Olivia was in recovery, her baby nestled safely in her arms. Hope sat beside him, tail wagging as Olivia reached out, her fingers brushing over the dog's head. "She saved us," Olivia whispered. "She never left us." Miller nodded. "No, she didn't." The case was closed. But Hope's job had never been about catching criminals or solving mysteries. She had been guarding something far more important, and she had won.